Welcome. I'm André Churchwell, Vice Chancellor for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and Chief Diversity Officer here at Vanderbilt University. I want to welcome you all to a discussion today as an update to our last year's symposium on racial justice, freedom, and activism in Nashville and beyond, then and now. To our audience, if you have not seen our first symposium, please go online to YouTube and look at that. It will give you some context as to what we're going to be talking about today. We created the original symposium in response to the ongoing turbulence in society in the wake of the death of George Floyd and many other Black Americans. We felt that viewing these times through a Nashville lens was useful, given that Nashville's seminal role in the 1960s civil rights movement. It was truly the intellectual center of the civil rights movement, a center populated by legends such as C.T. Vivian, the Reverend James Lawson, the young activist John Lewis, who was at that time a student at the American Baptist College, and other activists. We also examined the role of his history and historians and the media and the role they played at the time, looking both at past and present examples. I characterize our time, along with my card-carrying historian colleague and co-host, Professor Dennis Dickerson, as this moment of reckoning, a reckoning on social and moral justice in America, and for that matter, the world. Unfortunately, this current year has seen further escalations of social turbulence, affecting many more minority and marginalized groups, not just African Americans, but Hispanic Americans, indigenous people, members of the Asian American Pacific Islander community, members of our LGBTQI+ community, and a host of other isms that have come to fore, such as anti-Semitism on the rise. All of these events and actions have brought us back to this stage. And we're back here to discuss these assaults on our democracy and the fabric of our republic. I've asked two of our original panelists and moderators to return today, Carolyn Randall Williams, author, chef, activist, teacher, and now TV host. Recently, Carolyn has been chosen by Southern Living magazine as one of the 50 people changing the South. I'm not so surprised by that. Next, her spectacular mother, to my right, the celebrated author, Alice Randall, writer in residence for African American and the Diaspora Studies here at Vanderbilt. Professor Randall holds the Andrew Mellon Chair in Humanities. And isn't that something? Our new member we're adding to this discussion, though, and to our team, and I'm really excited to have her join us, is Professor Carla McCanders, Clinical Professor of Law and Associate Director of the Legal Clinic. Also, like our other panelists, she's a scholar, an activist, and happens to be a lawyer, too. I thank all of our panelists for joining us today. Each of you have a unique perspective based on your life journeys, certainly shaped by being Black women in America, and as artists, writers, and scholars who think and write about the human condition from various vantage points. Alice and Caroline, your lens or vantage points are from your work and writing in the humanities and social justice, and your Southern heritage, too, I might add. Carla, from your legal lens, your vantage point as an expert in immigration, race, and administrative state, your areas of study run the gamut from immigration law to critical race theory and the law. I'm excited to have all of you here. You great luminaries that'll hope bring some new ideas and some refreshing thoughts about this challenging time that we're facing. Let us begin. And most of the questions I'm throwing out to the audience in general, there'll be maybe one targeted question for Carla because of her position as a legal scholar. How can and does art offer hope in such a dark time in our democracy? I'd like to hear everyone join in on that one. Carolyn, you want to offer some thoughts on that?
I think that when I think about how art offers hope, my first thought is that art is a truth-telling act of some kind, and it's an act of trying to tell the truth for the sake of empathy, to give other people some respite, and also to help advance the cause of the people that need their truth told, right? So it's an act of witnessing as well. And I think that there's hope in the truth, if we can grasp it. And I think that art makes the truth more digestible to people sometimes. So, a good comedy sketch can often enter more hearts and homes to bring a point across than pages of academic discourse with all of the proof and the numbers.
So it's much more familiar grounds.
Mm-hmm. So there's hope in the truth.
Great, thank you. Alice, what do you think?
Well, first I want to note that art has been bringing hope for a long time, particularly here in Nashville. As we sit at Vanderbilt University and we sit across from Fisk University with the famed Jubilee Singers, who were extraordinary singers who built a university physically and raising the money for it with their songs, with the historic songs of the American Negro, the W.E.B. Du Bois spoke of. I also want to note that in the Harlem Renaissance period, when the Renaissance was over and the hard days of the economy were hitting, of the Depression, New York, and the Black arts community, many sought refuge in Nashville at Fisk University and found it. Aaron Douglas, Arna Bontemps. So we have always had hard times in this country, and this country has fallen short of its ideals for a long time and continues to reach towards our ideals. And art has been, by providing access to power and access to beauty, access to revival, art has always been a way forward in the hard times. Access to beauty, access to intellectual power, access to self-revival.
Wow, spectacular. I'd like to delve a little bit before I move on to Carla here. The Fisk Jubilee Centers, we all have connections there. We're Nashvillians, at least the three of us, and certainly you're connected to it just by the history of Fisk. Fisk was founded 7 years before Vanderbilt, 1866. And the Baptist Missionary Board did what they could in terms of starting the school off with a certain amount of funding. But the school rapidly began to run out of money. And so the Fisk Jubilee Singers, along with art, as you make the case, they brought hope because they went out on their own as a brilliant idea to tour the world, this country and the world, to raise money. So art brought hope to, as you so beautifully pointed out, to Fisk that allows it to still exist and survive as a major university. Carla, your thoughts?
One might think that a lawyer does not, find inspiration in art. However, my foundations in terms of, my grandparents are from the South, they migrated to the North. One of the things that stands out for me with art is, gathering around the TV and watching Eyes on the Prize when I was really little, and the, images, the black and white images of the civil rights movement and the gospel music. Mm-hmm. It fueled my calling to social justice activism. The compelling stories, the famous images of African Americans being hosed down when they were protesting, the Selma Bridge, people protesting and marching were the images that were seared into my memory as a little girl and propelled me to seek a career in law to impact social change. So art is, it is very, especially as a young child, was very compelling in terms of what I pursued as my life calling as a lawyer.
Wow, powerful stuff. I'm reminded, my father pointed out to me years ago that Steal Away, the great gospel hymn, had multiple meanings. Mm-hmm. It was sung as a steal away to Jesus. If you're a slave, you could steal away during the singing of that hymn to be transported someplace other than on your master's plantation. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, it was also used as a calling card for the Underground Railroad, that you would approach a friendly home, maybe in Wisconsin or in Connecticut, and you would sing that song as a clue that you're stealing away and please open the door and let us in. So kind of amazing how art and hope, how it's not just hope, but it can be a way for freedom at the same time, as you all pointed out. Carl, I have a specific legal question. Given some of the high-profile court decisions playing out that can and will affect our democracy, some people see the legal process as part of the problem. How do you see it as part of our solution in our quest for justice and freedom? Share that with us.
I think that the law, especially our Constitution, is aspirational in nature. And especially as an African American lawyer, I see myself as having one foot inside the law and one foot outside of the law. And I think that can be an empowering place to engage with the law. You see the law as what it could be, but you also understand the past. I understand that my grandmother growing up in Mississippi, my grandfather growing up in Louisiana were subject to de jure segregation. When my parents grew up in Michigan and moved up there for the auto plants, they were subject to de facto segregation. Now we might have laws and they may appear on their face to be neutral, but they still have a disparate impact on minorities, African Americans. And what I see my role, especially as a law professor, is to educate students, my law students, about the ways in which the law has a segregated society, but also the liberatory nature of the law, and that the law is just one piece of the puzzle. That we have activists, we have people that are engaging in many ways, and often the lawyer is just there to push us across the finish line to make sure that our laws are congruent with the aspirational nature of freedom that we are seeking. So I think that given our country's history, we can see the laws as being part of segregation in our country, but there is a liberatory, aspirational nature to the laws that we have to constantly make sure that the laws are in line with how we want our country to be. And so being a law professor, that's what I do in terms of educating my students, is to allow them to have this balance between being inside and outside of the law at the same time.
The balancing scales there. Wow. Back to art. How can art in all of its forms, which include prose, poetry, painting, and the like, be part of a social justice toolkit to pass that offer freedom? The example I raised is the one of Marian Anderson singing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in 1939, because she was not allowed to sing in Constitution Hall by the Daughters of the Revolution. And that mere act of singing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial brought out 70,000 plus people of all race and ethnicities in 1939 to hear her sing and talk about her love of this country as she sang My Country 'Tis of Thee. What do you all think about that?
André, I'd like to jump in on this because I've been giving a lot of thought to that point. I think that it's very important that people add particularly novels to their work, anti-racist work, because we have some very good data actually that reading nonfiction often reinforces confirmation bias, whereas engaging with fiction, novels in particular, and other forms of art increases empathy and also increases our tolerance of ambiguity and our willingness to not move towards premature cognitive closure. Coming to the answer before all the facts are in, that's premature cognitive closure. Art prepares us to sit with ambiguity, wait for more information to be available, and to empathize with others. All of these are very important skills to have in an increasingly complex world where facts are so important, but so many and so hard to sort.
Boy, excellent. So the issue of ambiguity is spectacular, and also uncertainty, right? You don't have all the answers. Carolyn, what do you think?
I think I'm lucky to have such a mother.
I think we all agree on that one.
Yes. So I'm a millennial, and I think about how so much of the cultural capital of the age is to do with celebrity. And so much of celebrity, hopefully, is still to do with making art, and whether that be music or acting so for example, I follow Viola Davis on Instagram. She also produced my TV show, but I follow her anyway because I would follow the Woman King. And much of her page is to do with self-care, questions of social justice, current events. And there are people that might have never tuned into MSNBC or decided they were going to subscribe to New York Times updates or Wall Street Journal, any updates of current events, but they saw her in a film and they go and they follow her page, and she sheds a light and she points people toward what's going on in the world. And so I think mindful artists who bring people to their art for the relief and pleasure that art offers, and then they use that platform to reorient their fans' gazes toward what's going on in the world. I think that that's so powerful. And so, I've lived that that's so powerful. So I think that for me, part of it is the fact that we privilege this position of celebrity and of art making at such a scale in the world today can be to great good when those artists use that platform responsibly.
So the artists themselves are the tool as she's using her life and her life story and her interests. That's spectacular. Carla, any other thoughts on your part?
I especially agree with Alice in terms of the way in which narrative is shaped, because narrative plays a large role in the law, and lawyers essentially are creating stories. They're shaping history in ways, and so being able to highlight, as a social justice lawyer, highlight the stories of individuals whose voices have been traditionally marginalized is one way in which I think lawyers can learn from art, and looking at and telling the stories of individuals who have not been reflected in the law. So I think lawyers need to pay more attention to what's happening in fiction, even nonfiction, in terms of who we look at and what is the norm in terms of how we explain what's going on through the law.
Perfect. Thank you. This next question spills a little bit off of Alice's comments about the complexity of the world, how we're dealing with multiple facts, and also throw in the uncertainty and the ambiguity that exists. But now we have a system in place or attitudes or actions in place where people are making decisions without facts. When writing either in prose or briefs, why is factual history important? Some say we have had an age of enlightenment, an age of reason. Some write we're in an age of mendacity. How about that? Carl, I'll come back to you on that.
I think this is really important, as I was just touching on, in terms of go back to the civil rights movement and we look at the complaints that were drafted. They used narrative and they highlighted the voices of individuals who have been marginalized by the law. I think that judges now are realizing the power of narrative. A judge out of Mississippi, Judge Reeves, just issued, probably 2 years ago, a decision on qualified immunity, the doctrine that prevents police liability when you have police shootings. Unfortunately, he couldn't overturn that doctrine, but he used the narratives and the stories of individuals who have been subject to police brutality, individuals who had been killed by the police. He highlighted, in his opinion, those stories and narratives. He also cited to TikTok, in his opinion, in terms of a person explaining the doctrine of qualified immunity. And so again, I think judges are understanding the impact of their decisions and how narrative and historical narrative impacts the ways in which the law is viewed and the ways in which we understand how the law operates in our society. And so narrative, in whose voice is highlighted, is extremely important in terms of how the law is implemented and who the law benefits. And so I emphasize a lot with my students, examining the narratives, examining the arguments that we're making and how they are, creating, people that the law, marginalizes, or, in ways, how can we work with narratives to make the law more liberatory for individuals.
Great. In those narratives, once again, coming back to the fundamental question about facts and factual history, we are still in an age where it appears to be you can get by having your own set of facts. Caroline, what do you think?
Well, I think one of my hardest classes I ever took was statistics, because it's so easy to reorient numbers to support confirmation bias, right? And I also think the age of mendacity, you said that and it struck a chord for me, because I think about how much lying happened during the Enlightenment too. There's so much lying has happened for so long, and so I'm really more thinking about what kinds of lies, right? Because I'm thinking about lies of omission, lies of obfuscation, and now it's sort of like these bald-faced lies is sort of the age that we're living in now, because you think about
lies.
We think about the Constitution as an aspirational document, and you grow up as a child, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and all of this, and then you're kind of going, but weren't my family brought here on the Middle Passage, to be owned and sold as so lie, right? or we all can vote now, lie, right? And so I'm thinking about the promises that have already been made, and that women have a right to choose, lie, right? That's sworn law. It's not. So I think that we actually are more in an age of facing the fact that they've been lying the whole time and figuring out how to write into law the promises. Because I think what we've had is that, there's the spirit of the law and the letter of the law. And, when the Constitution was written, the spirit of it was this is actually only for white men who own property. This, all men are created equal. And we're asking the spirit to change, and the letter has changed to a degree. However, what we really need the lawyers for is to make sure that all of those equality things that we have decided to ask the Constitution to live up to as the spirit of it actually are settled law freedoms. So that's my thought.
I got you.
One of the things that is interesting is, when you learn the law in school, you're learning what's called black letter law, and you learn we are all created equal. One thing that legal education needs to do better is telling the history behind the law. And as an immigration professor, one of the things that I start with is the 1790 Citizenship Act. Not everybody was entitled to citizenship. It was white males, and that excluded everyone from, if you weren't a white male landholder, you weren't entitled to citizenship. And so we need to, not just understand what is the black letter law, but what is the history behind that law, so we can start to dismantle, the underlying norms where there wasn't equality for everyone in those laws or in the Constitution. And so I'm a big advocate for adding that into our legal education, so that lawyers do not think that the law is just this colorblind, neutral doctrine. It has a history behind it, and that history, even though it's not on the face, it still lives through the law.
Phenomenal. Yeah.
Andre,
yes,
I think that question about facts, in the context of what you've just said, history, and what you've said, Caroline, is such a key question. Because I think we also get to this moment. Facts are what bring us to the world of reality versus the vision. From the real to the ideal. You have to start by assessing honestly what the real is. But there is not one objective real. There's not just one objective fact. I found the number of how many black girls lived in Detroit when I was born by the census. But it's unlikely that number is exactly accurate. There are reasons that people would have hidden a child. There are reasons that people would have lied. There's just actual error in the assemblage of the data. But because we know that facts are not perfect and that they are mutable, does not mean that we shouldn't seek the thing that they are meant to measure, which is reality. And so so we need to seek, and in COVID, Caroline's teaching a course on COVID and society. I know you have been a frontline physician. Just the fact that the facts change doesn't mean that we shouldn't be informed by the facts and that everything is a fact. You can't just make up things and say that this veterinarian medicine that has no impact whatsoever, it is a fact. That is not a fact. Whether or not Moderna or Pfizer is better, these are facts that change. Certain things are just myth. So I think that we have to concern ourselves with fact and recognize that fact is just a desire to communicate our shared actual reality. That will always be imperfect, but it is pushing us to look at something that is objective and rational and outside of the self, coexistent with things that are interior and subjective. It's a back and forth. Without a focus on facts, we don't look at what is our common experience, our commonly created reality, and seek to measure it, recognizing that all measurement will be imperfect.
This is right. This is spot on. I'd like to hear your thoughts about the COVID part, but as a physician and someone tied to trying to make decisions on evidence-based medicine or science, we were a bit of a quandary because we were doing something for the first time in our lives. We're actually living in the midst of a pandemic. And a pandemic, we're gathering the data, trying to analyze it, at the same time making decisions on therapy. And so it is a unique time because as you make the case, you're watching things play out. What you think on day one is a fact can alter, but that's the nature of science, right? And the nature of evidence. As better evidence comes in that's more accurate, that has more power attached to it, more numbers attached to it, then the truth or the reality can shift. That's just the nature of the way science is. You're teaching a course on this, is that right?
I'm co-teaching a course with Jonathan Metzel, who is a sociologist and a psychiatrist. He's got an MD and a PhD, and also Selena Callahan-Kapoor, who's a medical anthropologist. So I'm the resident artist because we need to do the truth-telling in an artful way, even through times of great crisis, or maybe perhaps especially in times of great crisis. And one of the lectures we talked with the students about, well, you know, the subject of that week is the death of expertise. But it speaks to what you're talking about, that people are so determined to both be experts and to know the facts at once, and then to be enraged when the facts evolve because they're not acquainted with the scientific method. And so, you know, speaking to Mom's point, you know, the uncertainty, people don't know how to live with ambiguity and on shifting sands, and that's especially true when we don't all agree on what it means to say, claim an identity as a United States citizen. What does that mean to each one of us? That's a movable fact, right? That's not a shared sentiment, how we feel about it, what patriotism means, what building a community and all mucking in together means. That means something different to everybody. And so I think that, you know, the question of, you know, how COVID integrates into that, you know, it touches all of those questions. It touches, you know, do I vaccinate myself whether I believe in it working or not based on the facts, because I know that at the very least it will make other people more comfortable and make me an honorable citizen, right? The questions of the racial and socioeconomic disparities that it has revealed. I'm talking in circles now, but
no, but it's true, and that's the nature of science, and I think it speaks to the fact that part of the challenge that people like Anthony Fauci and others had when they were out in the public forum, out there on the public square, is that we need to probably begin by explaining how evidence-based decision-making can change. It is mutable. It is not one fact that stands forever about the treatment and the like.
No, it's so interesting, and just to take breast cancer. There was one point where, you know, the radical mastectomy was the choice. Then there became the lumpectomy. Now there has been chemotherapy. Now we have immunotherapies. Facts change. It is part of being a mature person to recognize that facts change, things change. But it does not mean that you should just roll the dice. I love this phrase, based on the evidence we have now, based on what we know right now, this is the best decision. And it doesn't mean that you get the outcome you want. It means that you are likely maximizing the possibility that that will happen. Absolutely. And I think that we are called upon to be mature. I think that we are called upon to live with those ambiguities, to seek facts, to celebrate our own, and I think this is what the artists do, celebrate our own imperfection and respect the imperfection of others while we seek, like our country, to be as good as we can be.
Work in progress. Next question, to paraphrase a speech of President John F. Kennedy, art in all its expressions, whether it's poetry or an illuminating scholarly piece, creates a nationwide movement towards excellence. It offers a great unifying and humanizing experience. Can art, again, that's the question, restating my original question, offer hope and, more importantly, a way forward for a more just, civil, and moral society? Carla, what do you think?
Definitely. I think that one of the projects on which I'm working is a children's book, and it's a children's book that highlights the experience of a Honduran girl who is of African descent. And so the ways in which what we think about at the southern border and who is at the southern border, the story through using a children's book is geared towards shifting the narratives, shifting the perception through art so that people can understand what happens at the southern border, what happens if you come to the southern border and you are of African descent, how are you treated? How do you navigate through the immigration system as a person of African descent? And so the goal is through art to engage with children and the parents reading the book too, to understand what it means to be racialized Black in the United States when you come to the border. And my hope is that, through engaging with art, we're also engaging with narrative and storytelling and telling the story of individuals that we don't usually see highlighted at the border, and shifting perspective in terms of understanding, what it means to be an immigrant of African descent in our country.
Kennedy really was a big proponent of art's humanizing effect, but also as a way of educating. My goodness, your books certainly educate.
Yes, and there's a lot of work going on right now on use of music, using pop and contemporary songwriters to actually create mathematics curriculums. And it's been very successful, taking formula and principles and putting them into songs and chants. I think of art as it's a great equalizer. If you teach a person 3 songs or 3 poems, whether they end up in prison, in a desert, or in a CAT scan tube, they can take that with them as an ally. Art it's highly portable in the individual, as long as they have memory. It's also something, we cannot all be experts in the law, on cardiac surgery, on poetry, or Shakespeare, as Caroline. But actually, everyone can be an artist. Everyone can consume art. Everyone can create art. We will not all do it at the same level, but actually, everyone can be an artist. And I think that if we start encouraging people to engage their inner artist, as opposed to, I have to say to some people, now when did you graduate from medical school? As opposed to going onto Google and deciding that they actually now have expert information on a whole variety of medical things. But the stories they tell, the songs they write, actually they may achieve something very important there. And so I think that art is the great equalizer, because everyone can consume it, everyone can create it, and it can be internalized in your body and go with you wherever you go. It's the one possession and access to beauty that actually cannot be taken away from you.
Phenomenal. Beautiful. Kelly, any thought? Can it move us to a more just, civil, and moral society? I think you use it in that way.
I hope I do. So here are 4 facts. I love Shakespeare. I love Beyonce. I love Van Gogh. I love Kara Walker. Those are facts. They're indisputably true. You can't take them away. There's nothing, it's not going to move. Those are facts. Now, why I love all 4 of them is because I find truth in the art of them. And now I think that there's something about the difference between a fact and perhaps a spiritual or moral or intangible truth, fundamental truth. I look at Van Gogh, that is not a painting, that doesn't look like a photograph of a man, his self-portrait. It looks like his truth of who he felt himself to be. And it resonates with me because it's imperfect, it's textured, the colors, and I'm not alone in that, right? And the same is true, if Beyonce is recreating the drama of her life in a music video or a song, and I'm experiencing, tell it sister, like there's something true of that. I'm not married to Jay-Z, I don't have 3 children, I don't live that life, but the truth of something about how she connects resonates with me. Shakespeare, not for an age, but for all time. There's something infinite in his variety. Keats said that, right? Kara Walker, depicts the black female body despite the fact that she changes the proportions, but she changes them in ways that make me feel seen because of how I experience my body in the world. So I think that what art can do is offer a lens into a more like spiritual and moral truth that allows us all to expand our imaginations when we connect with it, and which is humanizing and society building, hopefully.
We hope these actions and these thoughts hopefully are resonating in the heads of not just us and those in the academy, but hopefully in our political leaders. Leads me to our next question. Why are we missing moral leadership, it seems, in our political leadership? As we confront the rise in racism, the rise in anti-Semitism, it's a real challenge. And so from those of us that are on this television video, we certainly are committed to the idea that educating our students, and we recognize the power and value of character and morals. Why is it missing in our leaders?
It's the question of the age.
Question of the age. Yeah.
I do
Maybe
think,
my best question.
I think that I think that's an interesting thing about art right now, to speak from me, not to call out the politicians, but call in the artist. That art about good, everyday, heroic people is not in fashion right now. That one of the things that I've tried to refocus on is everyday heroism, everyday industry, everyday human beings doing everyday things. What gets published typically, what gets made, we are often wanting to look at ragged edges, extremes, and not think it is worthy and wise and smart to think about the goodness. Black Bottom Saints, my most recent novel, is actively a book of virtues, not the typical virtues. I'm looking at what are modern virtues of real people and celebrating that. I think as an entire society, we have gotten, quote unquote, too cool for the school of love. And I think that as an entire society, we have become addicted to rage, addicted to outrage, addicted to these quick fixes as opposed to, and I think that art actually has to woo us back to more subtlety, more subtle beauty, more of these subtle, significant stories of the everyday heroism of real people.
You trigger my brain about Robert Cole's book on moral leadership, the examples. He specifically makes the case in the book that I'm going to talk about Robert Kennedy, who I love, and his push on the Appalachian, the challenge of healthcare in Appalachia in the early part of in the 1960s. But he made the case to find everyday people who were living moral lives that were shaping their communities or their families or their churches in ways that were leading them in the right direction, leading them in the direction that we thought would be moral and purposeful. So maybe that's what we need to focus on then. Any thoughts on that?
I think one of the problems, when you think about moral leadership, and I've volunteered for so many different election things, so many different political causes, and getting people to vote for the people with the morals is really hard. Because it's not like people with morals don't run. Right. And I think that the failure of the voting populace, that's a failure of our education system, because we given people suffrage, but we haven't given people access to adequate education. And so we have people who can vote but can't think. And I think, or perhaps they could think, but they haven't been invited to inquire and taught like the rigors and the moral obligation of inquiry if you're going to wield a vote. Like you can't drive a car without going to school, but you can cast a vote for who's going to inform my schools, my health care, my national and international security. And I think that is a vote is a dangerous weapon, and we don't teach people how to wield it adequately, and it's frightening. And I think that the trade-off, the shift, because we haven't all wanted to unite about what this American identity means. The shift as more people get suffrage and engage with it, but don't get informed in the interim because of other tensions and failures of moral and practical imagination in this country. We have this larger and larger group of people that are voting who are not thinking. And I think that it's resulting in the most abhorrent candidates finding the greatest purchase. Yeah.
Got it. Any other thoughts?
When you ask the
Thank
question,
you, Carol.
I immediately go to, what are we teaching our lawyers in law school? And so all lawyers have an ethical requirement that stems back to Nixon and Watergate. And so we teach our, law students, ethical principles that govern yourself as an attorney. We have requirements that you have to continuously update ethics. However, that, does not, we need to go deeper than what we teach our attorneys in terms of ethics and their relationships with clients. And there has to be a moral compass that guides the lawyer. And I agree with Alice in terms of when we look at, why do I become a lawyer? There are ways in which the lawyer centers themselves in advocating for their clients. However, one of the hallmarks of a social justice lawyer is to not center yourself and to center the voices of your clients. And I think that goes back to some of the quick fix or looking at the edges. When we look at Bryan Stevenson, we look at the final product. We looked at his movie, but we don't look at what it took for him to go to the South and be a death penalty lawyer and to go into jails day in, day out and be subject to discrimination. We're looking at the final product. And I think that we think that we can just, graduate from law school and, become Bryan Stevenson without the years and years of work, the years and years of study, the years and years of not centering yourself, but centering your client's story and advocating for your client. And so, the lawyer has a, special role in society. However, that role can be skewed and is impacted by the way in which we interact in society now, and the quick nature of wanting to become Bryan Stevenson overnight versus rolling up your sleeves and doing the work that it takes to reach that 20 years after you graduate from law school.
I think there's also a very fundamental problem that we have. We were formed as a nation with the separation of church and state, and I completely agree with that. However, for most of the history of the nation, people have been informed by a variety of rich religious practices, a Judeo-Christian tradition, Hinduism, Muslimness, all of these which center a kind of ethical standards. As we've become an increasingly secular nation, though people refer to religion, but are not being guided by it, we have to ask ourselves these basic questions. For example, do I want my fair share or just as much as I can get? If I just go to the 10 Commandments, I've got a lot of rules. If I live by them, whether you think they're divinely inspired or the best of what man came up with, it'll lead me on a sort of moral, ethical life. Right now, I think we have a lot of people thinking that they will take what they can get, that this is this sort of dog-eat-dog world, and that in Bitcoin, they're not worried about whether Bitcoin has value or doesn't. I'm not saying if it does or doesn't. They're thinking, if I can make money making people think it has, it's valid. They're not asking themselves the question, what really does it stand for? So this issue of, am I willing to be a bully in any setting? I think it's hard enough. I will say, I only want to take my fair share. It's very hard to know what my fair share is, and it's very hard to know the mechanisms to construct how I would get the rest of what I don't take to people in reasonable ways. But if we are not even starting from the idea, and I no longer believe that everybody only wants their fair share, and that is the hard question that we have to ask ourselves as a nation, but I do believe actually most people throughout the globe are people of good heart, and they want to only take their fair share. And a lot of the bad behavior and things we see is because they feel afflicted. They feel that someone else took their fair share, that they don't have it. So I think art gets us back to that heart and soul of the matter, that so much of the conflict we see in this world today is not because people don't want to give the next person their fair share. It's because they believe they haven't been given theirs. And we need to partially self-medicate with art. And some of that is delusion. Some of the most privileged people in this country think they have had something taken from them. That is not true. That's not factually correct. You can see it's the clients that you have who are being deprived, the people you're writing poems to that are being deprived. We can give you some hard facts about who actually is deprived, but we've got to deal with the spiritual reality that people who think they're not being given their fair share will try to take from others. So let's start to recalibrate.
It kind of speaks to the first question. Art, which is why we're still here and we're still coming to work every day and we're still teaching and doing our jobs, it offers us hope. It offers us hope that, as you say, at the end of the day, people of the world of good will and spirit who are connected to those important moral and character traits that we know that will sustain a society and a civilization will hopefully have their say at the end. Yeah. I'm going to end with James Baldwin. How about that? James Baldwin once said, if one really wishes to know how justice is administered in a country, one does not question the policemen, the lawyers, the judges, or the protected members of the middle class. One goes to the unprotected, those precisely who need the law's protection the most, and listens to their testimony. What does that say to you? Carolyn, you want to offer some thoughts?
I speaking after James Baldwin's words is
it's a challenge.
It's risky. I will say that I think it says to me that if you performed that exercise in this country, you'd come to the conclusion that there's a great deal of work to be done, and that some radical failure had transpired. And I think, which I think we know, but I think that it's unsettling to me to think now about how, you could be glib and say, well, that might be true anywhere, but I actually think that in terms of countries of comparable wealth and perhaps military might and, and resources, that the United States would really stack up poorly if you ask the least among us how we're doing here relative to other places. And I think that when I think about having a more global discussion as a world citizen, I find that I'm even more discomfited, especially in the COVID moment.
Great.
I think that Baldwin is giving us so much insight. We have to move from trauma to transcendence. That the least among us are in moments of trauma. And what can we send out? What can we do? Art is part of that, of what we can do to help, because it will give people hope while we're figuring out the rest.
I think Baldwin hits it on the nail in terms of what is the job of a social justice lawyer. A social justice lawyer is a listener. The social justice lawyer welcomes the client into their office and listens and takes their cues for how our society should be, what the law should do, what the law isn't doing from that person sitting in their office. And so it's not about the lawyer again. The lawyer has to step back and allow the client's story to navigate how they interact with the court system. And I think litigating from that perspective, from your client's perspective, is radical. and it changes. That's where the change comes from. And again, I said earlier that the lawyer is just there to push everything across the line. But the client comes in, the client knows what's going on in my neighborhood, the client knows what it means to be detained, the client has that experience, and I use the tools of my legal education to listen to the client, be with the client, to witness what the client is going through, and then use the law as a tool to change the system. So I think, of course, Baldwin is right on.
Boy, it's hard to go past any other author than Baldwin when we're talking about the rights of African Americans in this country and his vision and his views of what he saw from his perspective. So I want to thank you guys for joining me in this discussion today. You offer, with your unique lenses, another look at race, freedom, and justice and the challenges that we face in this country, and we will continue to face them, obviously. We have not solved them in this hour or the time we've been discussing, but hopefully have stimulated you to read and learn about these important topics and the challenges and the ideas that they're bringing forth. And please do so with an open mind and with civil discussion. So thank you today for joining us. I'm André Churchwell, Vice Chancellor for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and Chief Diversity Officer here at Vanderbilt. Thank you and have a great day.